Good evening all, and welcome to day 2 of the June content bonanza. Tonight I'm going to be hitting you with a selection of ghost stories. So get comfortable and let the darkness take control. My father is a contractor, which meant we moved around the country a lot, going wherever his work took him. One particular contract had us moving into a beautiful but unsettling old farmhouse situated on a sprawling, isolated estate. The house was huge, with 2 stories, creaky wooden floors, and even an old laundry shaft like the kind you see in horror movies, which is a rarity in South Africa. I was homeschooled at the time, so I spent most of my days wandering aimlessly around the property. My mother and I hardly left. The house became our world. The elderly couple who owned the property had built a small cottage about 500 meters away from the main house, where they now lived. The house had been built by the gentleman's father, and he had lived there his entire life, raising his 2 children in that very home. I found it very odd that they had chosen to live in the cramped cottage while renting out the house, but I reasoned that with their age, maintaining such a large place was probably too much work for them. At first, everything seemed normal, but about a month into our stay, small things began to feel off. My mum would always start cooking an hour before my dad got home, so his dinner would be ready and his bath already drawn. One evening while we were in the lounge, we heard a rattling sound from the kitchen. It sounded like a pot boiling over, but when my mum went to check, every single dish had been taken out of the cupboards and placed face down on the counter. She immediately blamed me, but no amount of pleading convinced her otherwise, and I was starting to feel uneasy. Days later, we were watching TV in the lounge when we heard footsteps upstairs. Slow, deliberate steps on the wooden floor pacing back and forth. The footsteps moved towards the stairs and then silence. We checked the house, but of course no one was there. The footsteps and the sound of shuffling cutlery in the kitchen became more frequent. My mum was spooked, but my dad shrugged it off. "It's just the wind," he said. "Or maybe a bird flew in through the window." He said nothing about the dishes, but I could tell he thought I was playing some elaborate prank even though I wasn't. Then came the day that still haunts me. My mother had gone out shopping, leaving me home alone. I was sitting in front of the TV playing my Game Boy when I heard the footsteps again. Only this time they didn't stop at the top of the stairs. I froze as I heard the distant creak of each step as something descended slowly and deliberately. The sound grew louder and closer. I swear I could hear the weight of whatever it was pressing down on the old wood, and my blood went ice cold. This wasn't the wind. This was an animal. I didn't even think. I bolted, Game Boy in hand. I sprinted out of the house and towards the farm gate 3 kilometers away. I didn't look back, I couldn't. The entire time I felt a presence behind me. Something unseen but heavy. Something that wanted me to turn around. I didn't stop until I was at the gate, panting and terrified. Hours passed, my Game Boy died, and I just sat there holding it like a lifeline, knowing that there would be fresh batteries charging inside. But I wasn't about to go back for them. Mortal Kombat would have to wait. After that day, the activity never got quite as intense, but the footsteps continued, and the odd fork or plate would be out of place. My mum and I were constantly on edge. We stayed in that house for just over a year, but about a month before we moved out, curiosity got the better of us. My mum and I decided to visit the elderly couple to ask if they had ever experienced anything strange while living there. The old man's face darkened when we brought it up. He was quiet for a moment, then told us a story that sent chills down our spine. He had twins, a boy and a girl. When they were around 16, the girl was attacked on their way home from the farm. She was never the same after that. Her light was gone. One day he came home to find her hanging in the kitchen. Her brother, who had always been fiercely protective of her, was shattered. He couldn't cope with the loss, and a few years later, took his own life in the same house. The old man never showed us where, just told us it happened. But then in a voice barely above a whisper, he told us the real reason he had moved out. At night when they lay in bed, they could hear their voices, whispers, sometimes quiet, sometimes loud, but always the same. It was their children's voices talking to each other like they used to when they were alive. The burden of hearing their dead children at night was too much to bear. They built the cottage and moved there to escape. Even after hearing all that, I still tried to convince myself that I just had to be rational and everything had a logical explanation. I've never been one to jump to the paranormal for a conclusion, but to this day I can't explain what happened in that house, and the memory of those footsteps moving towards me down the stairs when I was alone still makes my skin crawl. In 2017, we moved to a quiet little rental in West Plains, Missouri. It wasn't much, 3 bedrooms, 1 hallway, no basement or attic, but it was clean, peaceful and normal. For months, everything felt right, no strange sounds, no bad energy, it was just home. But that peace didn't last. It was a normal morning. I got up, got dressed, and said goodbye to my partner and our 2 kids and heading off to work like I always did. My 5-year-old son was home with his mom and older sister. Everything was fine when I left. I came home that evening expecting more of the same, the usual chaos of kids playing or the smell of dinner cooking, but instead the house was dead quiet. Not eerie quiet, just empty. It wasn't unusual, maybe they were out running errands, but something didn't sit right. Just to be sure, I did a quick walkthrough of the house, calling their names and checking each room. Every door stood open, every light was off. Satisfied and a little amused that they hadn't popped out to scare me, I headed back to the living room and sat down on the futon facing the short hallway that led to the bedrooms. I was still in work clothes. Just settled in, I rolled a joint and struck a lighter. But before I could take a single hit, he ran out of the back bedroom. My son, or someone or something that looked eerily like him. He sprinted halfway into the hallway where the light from the living room met the dark, and then he stopped, just staring at me. I jumped so hard I nearly fell backwards. My heart slammed into my throat and I tumbled into the kitchen on instinct. But when I turned back towards the hallway, he was gone. I waited, staring into the black mouth of the hallway, straining to hear any sound at all. There wasn't any. Now listen, my son was 5. 5-year-olds can't sit still, let alone keep a straight face during a prank. If it had been him, he'd be giggling behind the curtain or crawling out of the closet, whispering, "Boo!" He couldn't have just disappeared like that. And even if he tried, his sister would have cracked up and ruined it. I knew my kids, and I knew I'd checked every room before I sat down. Still shaking, I tore through the house again, opening every closet, looking under every bed, looking in the bathroom, the laundry nook, even in the kitchen cabinets. But I was completely alone. And that's when it really hit me. Whatever I saw wasn't my son. I ran out the front door and waited on my porch, pacing and watching the street. 10 minutes, 20 minutes. Finally, I saw them. My partner, my son, and his sister coming down the sidewalk, bags in hand, straight from the store. I felt sick, because whatever had walked out of that bedroom was still in the house when I arrived, and it looked just like my son. I had various experiences throughout my life that I cannot logically explain. But today I'm going to tell you about an experience that unusually actually terrified me. For the last 20 years or so, my career has been motor vehicle related. I have held various fleet management and coordination roles with a number of large and/or international companies. One such employer was a government department. Around 2005, the UK government decided to set up a dedicated force to patrol England's motorways to keep them hazard-free. They were called Highway Agency Traffic Officers, known internally as HATO. Though a quick Google search now shows that they're called Highway England Traffic Officers, and if you have a look at the Wikipedia entry for them, you'll see a photo I took of one of the Land Rovers we used. Totally unsuitable vehicles for the job for several reasons, but they wouldn't listen to me. And besides, this story isn't really about my time and frustrations with that particular department. We used to have several sites around the country to train the new traffic officers' defensive driving skills, as well as how to deal with various situations they would expect to encounter within their new roles. These sites were almost exclusively disused World War II airfields, as we could paint mock motorways on the old runways for the training and use a hangar to securely store the vehicles in between training sessions. At Throckmorton Airfield, we used Hangar 1. It's a big hangar. We usually had a total of 15 Land Rovers and Nissan Pathfinders located at the site. And even with the more spaced out in the hangar, I'd reckon we'd only occupied a quarter of the floor space. I turned up early one morning between training sessions to do an inventory of the vehicles and their contents, brushes, traffic cones, split kits, etc. It was barely 6 AM on a cold March morning. I'd had a 5-minute chat with Darren, the airfield manager, to let him know I was on site, made myself a cup of tea in his office kitchen, and jumped back in my car to drive down to Hangar 1. I remember it was raining a light rain. I'd set off from my home in Basingstoke a little after 4:30 AM, and had driven through patches of thick fog most of the way to the airfield. And I especially remember wondering if this was going to be the type of weather I could expect for the rest of the day. I unlocked the big roller doors and rolled one open enough to drive my car in, then closed it behind me. The 15 or so vehicles were lined up against the wall, rears near the wall, all facing inwards. I parked up, switched the hangar lights on, grabbed my travel mug of hot tea and my clipboard, and for the next 40 minutes or so, set about checking tire tread depth, lights, and inventorying the contents of the vehicles. I was maybe halfway done with my head in the back of the Pathfinder, counting collapsible signs, when I heard a thick northern accent boom out. "Okay, give it a try now." My immediate thought was, who the hell was that? I walked between the vehicles until I'm abreast the front of the vehicle and can clearly see the rest of the hangar. "Hello?" I call out. But there's nothing but silence. You know the saying of when silence is deafening? That's what I experienced in that moment. And it filled me with dread. It frightened me. And even now, some 15 years later, as I share this, I still get goosebumps just thinking back to the situation. I called out again. "Is anyone there?" I feel rattled and don't know why. My gut is screaming at me to run, and I learned at a young age to trust my gut. I sprinted down the row of checked high-vis SUVs and leapt into my car, stopping only to open the roller door wide enough to get the car out, wheels spinning on wet tarmac and hightailing it back to Darren's office at the gatehouse. Darren told me a few months later at my next visit that when I appeared at his office doorway I was white as a sheet and shaking. I remember this somewhat differently. As I remember it, I casually walked into his office and plonked myself on the old sofa in the corner. Darren reckons he had to take my arm to guide me there. I do, however, correctly remember his question. Did you see something? Or was it the voice? Darren made me an Irish tea that was heavy on the Irish and told me that a few of the hangars have paranormal tenants, but Hangar 1 was by far the most active. He explained to me that from what he'd been told, during the war a couple of mechanics were working on an engine of a Wellington bomber. One was up on the wing and the other was underneath on the ground. The one that was on the wing said to his mate, "Okay, try now," and the other one tried to spin the propeller. The engine caught immediately, which he wasn't expecting. He overbalanced and fell into the now fast-spinning blades, which made very short work of him. Darren couldn't explain the malevolence the hangar has, but I wasn't the first to be terrified of Hangar 1, and I'm sure there will have been more after me. Unfortunately, I still had a job to do, so after a while, once my nerves had calmed down, I had to drive back and finish my inventory. But you can bet I kept that roller door open, with the engine of my car idling. More than 20 years ago, my mother lost the man who had been the closest thing to a father in her life, her stepdad. Her biological father had walked out on the family when she was 9 years old, leaving behind a wound that never fully healed. But her stepfather had stepped up, providing the care, stability, and love she had needed, and his passing was devastating. After the funeral, the family gathered at the house, mourning together, sharing stories and trying to fill the space he had left behind. The house was filled with the low hum of voices, and then the phone rang. My mother answered, expecting a relative of the family checking in, but what she heard sent a chill through her. A man's voice, urgent and uncertain. "Mabel?" The way someone might ask if they weren't sure they'd dialed the right number. She knew that voice. It was him. Her heart pounded. A flood of emotions surged through her. Shock, disbelief, fear. And in her panic, she slammed the receiver down. She immediately regretted it. Who was it? Was it him? Had he called out to her one last time? She quickly dialed *69, the old reverse call feature, to check the last incoming number, but there wasn't one. The phone company's record only showed an earlier call from someone she knew hours before, and as far as they were concerned, it had never happened. No one called back. Even now, decades later, my mother still believes it was him, and she regrets not answering, not saying anything. She wonders what would have happened if she had stayed on the line, if she had listened just a bit longer. For what it's worth, my mother isn't religious or spiritual. She doesn't believe in ghosts or the afterlife. But that moment haunts her in a way she can't explain. In 1998, my grandfather passed away at the age of 97. He had lived a long, full life, surviving wars, hardships, and countless changes in the world. But when he went to the hospital for colon surgery, my father and aunt knew his odds weren't great. Recovery was possible, but at his age, it was a coin toss. They stayed with him, keeping him company as he drifted in and out of consciousness. At one point he woke up, more alert than he had been in hours. Blinking, he looked around and asked, puzzled, "When did I get back?" Confused, my dad and aunt asked what he meant. He told them he had just been on a road trip in an Airstream trailer with an old friend, a buddy he hadn't spoken to in over 50 years. They had been driving down a long highway, the kind that stretches endlessly on both sides, nothing but open sky above. He'd been behind the wheel, and then suddenly a blinding light flooded the windshield, It was so bright he couldn't see, and then just like that he'd woken up in the hospital. They assured him it was just a dream. He nodded, closed his eyes, and within minutes he drifted off again. But this time he never woke up. Later, as they processed their grief, my grandma brought up something she hadn't thought about in decades. The friend in the dream. She knew exactly who it was. Back in the years following World War II, my grandfather and his friend had been inseparable. They had once talked about taking a cross-country road trip together, just the two of them, in an Airstream. They had made plans, dreamed about it, but life got in the way, and at some point they had a falling out, one so serious they never spoke again. The road trip never happened. Yet in his final moments, that journey had come back to him. Did his mind bring it up as a simple dream, a forgotten regret resurfacing at the end, or had it been something more? Had he in some way finally taken that trip after all? No one knows. But my dad and aunt always felt there was something profound about the way he went, on the road, with an old friend, driving towards the light. I grew up next door to a nice Polish couple called Ted and Josie. For 19 years our family loved them, and we considered them like our grandparents. One day, Ted passed away, and then Josie happened to pass 6 months after him. 4 days after that, I'm sleeping in my bedroom with my back towards the door, when I suddenly wake up. I looked at my alarm clock and it was 1 a.m. exactly. As I tried to go back to sleep, I heard the wooden floor from my room creak. I then felt the bed sink, as if someone had sat on it behind me. I thought it might be one of my sisters coming to bug me about her night, and I wasn't in the mood to entertain any gossip, so I pretended to sleep. A few seconds went by and she got up and left. The next day I had forgotten all about it, and didn't even mention it to my sisters if any of them had come to my room. Well, that night, the exact same thing occurred. I fell asleep at around 10:30, and by 1 a.m. I was awake again for no reason. Again I felt someone walk and sit on my edge of the bed. Now, I'm kind of scared, but stood motionless, pretending to be asleep again, facing away from the door, and wasn't going to turn around unless I was approached or spoken to. Again I felt this person get up from the bed, and left after a few seconds. I thought for sure I'll speak to my mum and siblings about this the next morning and went back to sleep. Now it's Sunday. I remembered, and so I asked my sisters in front of my room if any of them had walked into my room at night and sat on my bed for 2 nights in a row, for whatever reason. All 3 of them laughed at me and said no. They accused me of just being crazy, but I insisted. And then my mum turned around and said, "What if it's Josie's ghost?" "No way," I said. She then tells me that sometimes spirits need a candle lit in their honor so they can follow the light to their final resting place. She said maybe since her death, no one from her direct family lit a candle for her during the funeral. I thought it was a weird thing to say, but I felt honored, if true, that she had come to me at night since we were a family of 6. I remember thinking if she comes again tonight, I'll turn around and face her. Why not? Why would I be afraid of her since she was nothing but pure love since she was alive? She clearly must not be visiting me to hurt me or scare me. I got bold and told myself I would, and went about my day. I forgot all about it at night, and went to sleep early since I had school next morning. Well, I awoke that night at exactly 1 a.m., and I remembered what my mum had said and thought to myself, Josie. So I turned around and faced my door. I didn't have a physical door, it was just a curtain hanging from a rod. Well, I heard a chair outside my room move and saw the curtains start to move like a breeze was swaying and panicked. I freaked out. I turned towards the wall and covered myself with a blanket up to the ear. Here was the real thing and I couldn't face her. It was a surreal feeling. The room got very cold this time. I got stiff and started shaking and crying. Josie sat on my bed and placed her cold hand on my shoulder. Then I heard a faint, there. It was her voice. I stood there jaw locked. It seemed like it lasted a lot longer than the previous nights, but after a while she finally gets up and walks out. The room got warm again, but I remained clutched to my covers as I soaked the pillow in my tears. I wasn't going to turn around or get up for the rest of the night, and morning couldn't come fast enough. I remained awake in the shock for the entire night, and after what seemed like an eternity, 4 a.m. rolls around, and I hear my dad's alarm clock go off. He had to get up pretty early for work. As soon as he turned on the lights, I got up and ran to him to tell him what had happened to me. He saw how shaken I was with red eyes from crying, since I'd never stayed awake that long in my life. He believed me right away and told me not to worry. He was going to have my mum turn on a candle in my room for her while I was at school. I can't believe I went to school that day since I hadn't slept. And later on in the afternoon when I got back, Mum told me she had lit a candle in my room, and that was it. I never woke up at 1 a.m. again, so I'm guessing she was able to follow the light and rest in peace. After that experience, I was left in awe, and I definitely believe in ghosts. This story happened 14 years ago in a Midwestern state. My husband and I live in this state, but neither of us have any relatives in it. This was our first home, a multi-storied house built in the 90s. The house is part of a neighborhood where all homes are built in the same time frame. Only pets are 2 cats at the beginning. Then 4 months after moving in, we adopted a kitten called Violet. And the story begins. We moved into the home, redecorating normal things. My husband worked swing shifts and I worked day shifts. I was home alone at night, often, and I started to notice odd knocking sounds outside hitting the house. It seemed like a frequent occurrence. Then one day the kitten stood straight on her back feet and growled, staring into the dining room. I got up and as I walked into the room, those knocks started up again. This room was the only room that the noises were present in. I decided to knock back if I had heard it knock. A faint knock, like it was coming from the basement. I knocked back hard, waited and listened, and I received a hard return knock in the dining room, and I headed downstairs to the basement. The only items in the area were the washer and dryer and dirty clothes. Nothing scary or weird, but the knocking kept coming from the dining room above. Now I was annoyed. I went back to the dining room and knocked in a pattern and waited for an answer. And I received one. 2 knocks. My kitten, Violet, was now in the kitchen, standing up again on her back legs growling. Violet can see it clearly. I decided to leave the house and drive to my husband's job site and tell him what was going on. He promised to look around when he got home. The knocks happened while he was doing the looking around. The knocks continued on and off. I still didn't say anything to my mum. Then one evening, when we were home together watching a movie, we both dozed off. To me, it felt like my husband got off the couch. I opened my eyes and a man dressed in a grey sweatsuit stood before me. His head and hands were greyed out like old TV snow. I quickly closed my eyes and opened, and he was still standing in front of me. The face had not filled in yet. I yelled at my husband. The figure vanished. My husband checked again. No sign of a man, no knocks or pings in the house. And I made the call to my mum. They were planning to come out, and I explained to her what was going on. Mum advised me to burn cedar and blow at the apparition. During that time, I was waiting for them to arrive. I didn't stay at the house alone. Violet kept growling even though the other two cats were starting to growl and look at the dining room. My parents arrived, and my mum asked to sleep in the bedroom over the dining room. After the third night visiting, Mum said it was time. Mum announced after she performed the ceremony that we were not to speak about it for 3 days. She started singing the Ne Peitone songs, and after walking the property in all of the rooms. During the prayer, a large clanging noise came from the dining room. The ceremony was plain simple and lasted about an hour. 3 days later, we asked my mum what was going on, and she said that there were 2 separate entities in our property. The first was a boy who frequented the left side of the property line. Mum encountered him looking at the second-story bedroom, which was the bedroom overlooking the dining room. The boy was pelting rocks at the window and the walls. Mum asked the boy why, and the young boy said he wanted to talk to my friend. My mum said that his friend is gone. The previous owner had a son. The young boy said he wanted to talk to him before he did it, and by it he meant he was going to take his own life. My mum told the boy it was over. That day cannot be relived. The young boy didn't know that he was passed away. Mum helped him leave and go towards the light. This poor boy had been trapped, repeating the sad day over and over. The knocks and pings, his desperate way to get our attention and to find his friend. The second apparition was a person who lived there. He meant no harm but loved the home dearly. Mum asked him not to appear like that he was scaring the hell out of her daughter. Mum made it clear that he was not to be a nuisance if he chose to remain. After my parents left, I asked my neighbor across the street about our west side neighbor. All this time we kept our distance from her. The widow was always drunk, loud, and generally frightening. We didn't know anything about someone taking their life and what had transpired. 1 year before we moved in, their son, the west side neighbor, took their life in their basement. The mother had found him, and now we understood her behavior. After that, we have always been kind to her. You do not always know why people drink or abuse drugs. Now we do. I asked about the previous owner's son, if he was close to the deceased boy. Aaron, our owner's son, had been very close friends with him. They had grown up together. A year from when my mum performed the ceremony, Aaron, the neighbor's son, was visiting other friends on the street. He came to our door and asked to look at the house, his old home. Aaron took us to each room and told us what updates his dad would appreciate. I asked Aaron which bedroom was his, and it was the one my mum had spent the night in. Aaron looked out the window and talked about his childhood friend who used to pelt his window. Then Aaron stated his father always regretted leaving the home. We didn't know the father had passed away shortly after selling it. This was my first solo dealings with ghosts in a home. But we all, my husband and my father and I, experienced the paranormal and the power that my mother had in trying to help it move on. In the summer of 1873, I had taken a room in a seaside town on the southeast coast of England, one of those quaint little places with crooked lanes, damp sea air, and the kind of sleepy charm you only find in old-world resort towns. I was staying there for a few months, seeking peace and convalescence after a difficult year. One afternoon, I decided to pay a visit to some friends who lived in an older part of town. Their home, known as Brook House, was tucked away at the end of a narrow lane near the parish church. It was a red brick, 3-story Georgian structure arranged around a small, stone-paved courtyard. A high wall encircled the garden, blocking the lower floor windows from view and making the house feel simultaneously fortified and forgotten. As I approached that afternoon, something drew my eyes upwards. To the second-floor window on the right side of the house, there I stopped, cold. Behind the glass, framed by the yellowing lace curtains, was a figure, a young woman. She stood motionless, partly dressed, brushing her hair. Her face, calm but distant, was unmistakably that of Miss B, the daughter of the house. But something was wrong. In the angle of her shoulders, the slackness of her mouth. It was like seeing a photograph of someone you know, except it blinked. I entered the house and, startled and confused, only to find Miss B sitting in the drawing room fully dressed and reading a book. She said she'd been there for at least an hour and hadn't been upstairs at all. The next day, on July the 4th, I returned, this time accompanied by a friend, a woman we both trusted. We went directly to the room where I'd seen this apparition. It was stiflingly hot, so we opened the window wide. Below us, the garden was lush but slightly overgrown, as though it hadn't been tended to properly in some time. Then we returned downstairs for tea and music. When we went back up, the window was shut tight. Neither of us had closed it, and no one else was in the house. We exchanged uneasy glances, then headed out into the garden and looked up. That's when we saw her. There, standing motionless at the now closed window, was the same figure I had seen the day before. She looked like Miss B, but wasn't. Her face waxy and expressionless, her eyes black and hollow, locked onto mine like drills into bone. There was no movement and no life, and then her hands rose with unnatural stiffness, grasped the window sash and pulled it down. There was no sound, no scrape of wood, no creaking of hinges. It was like watching a silent film. As the sash moved down, her face vanished, as though cut into the wood, but her hands remained, lingering like pale spiders on the glass. I recognized the form. It was unmistakable. Rhoda, Miss B's older sister, dead now for 12 years. Miss B, who had been watching beside me, fainted. And the horror wasn't done. From the far right of the window drifted a large, white mass. Miss B would later call it the Headless Woman. It was smooth and hovered there, pacing in small loops and then melting into the shadows. We fled back inside and up to the room. We found the chair by the window was no longer where we'd left it. The door opened before was now firmly shut, and a deep silent dread crawled over my skin like frost. And then I wrote a note. I addressed it to the headless lady and placed it along with a piece of fruit from the garden on the chair beneath the window. A ridiculous gesture born of fear and fascination, and we went down to the garden and waited. After several minutes, the figure returned. The white shape appeared once more, floated towards the window, and then bowed. Moments later, the upstairs door slammed so hard, it echoed like a gunshot through the courtyard. When we finally got the courage to go back up, the chair had been overturned, the fruit scattered across the floor, and the note was still there. The next day brought only more dread. We entered the room again and found the bed slightly sunken, as if someone or something had laid there. We went back out into the garden and were discussing the events when we saw movement from that window. We looked up and saw once again the hands fiddling with the strap of the window, but no head upon the figure. Then, I'm not sure how, I felt it look at me, despite the absence of its head, and I felt suddenly unwell. The figure vanished. I returned back to my lodgings and then later to my own home, and my health deteriorated rapidly. For 2 years I was exceptionally unwell, and the memory haunted me. I personally think it was that apparition. I must have done something to offend it, and it hurt me deeply, nearly killing me, I suspect. But thankfully, I overcame it, and made sure to never pay another visit to Brook House again. And I recommend, dear friends, that you all heed my advice and stay well clear. My parents acquired a large Victorian 3-story house in South Wales, UK. A builder had bought it and was converting it into apartments, and he ran out of money. So the bank foreclosed, and somehow my parents acquired it for much cheapness. But it was a building site. The builders hadn't done much to the ground floor, but the other 2 floors were pretty much just shells. Structurally, the house was absolutely fine. It dated from around the 1800s. My dad asked me if I'd stay there so that people could see it was occupied, so that people wouldn't break in and squat. I set myself up in the main living area with a camp bed, and all was good. I had electricity and hot water, and despite its condition, the house was sealed from the weather. My first few experiences were hearing doors being opened and closed in other rooms. Of course, when I got there, I couldn't find anyone or anything untoward, or indeed any reason for the doors to just magically open or close. These were proper old wooden doors, and not likely to move in any draft. Not that there were any drafts in any case. The builders had replaced all the old window frames with good quality UPVC framed double glazing. The sounds of doors opening and closing when I was alone in the house became a common thing in my 3 years of living there. After my parents had put right all the builders' work, decorated, and the rest of the family moved in, my parents, sister, and briefly my brother until he got a place with his girlfriend. I ended up having the top floor to myself. The house had 6 bedrooms, 4 bedrooms, and the family bathroom on the first floor, and 2 bedrooms and a sort of kitchenette area on the second. The top floor, my floor. One room faced the street and was a bit noisy due to the traffic outside, and the other overlooked the back of the house and was much quieter. I set myself up in the back bedroom, but would soon be woken regularly by animals panting next to my head. I found out after a while that the last occupant was an old man who had a German Shepherd dog. Another thing I often heard in that room was creaking wood and a rustling noise like paper. I figured that someone used to have a creaky wooden chair or a rocking chair and would read the newspaper there. I tried to move to the front bedroom, but the noise of traffic was too much in the summer with the window open, and having it closed made the room unbearably hot and stuffy. So I soon moved back into the room and talked to the room about the dog waking me up, and to please try and keep him quiet. I was still woken up occasionally by panting noises, but it was a lot less frequently. One of the weirder things that started happening, I actually wasn't aware of until 2 years after living there. It had started slowly and built up over time. It was only when I moved out that I realized what was happening. I started to hear voices, several, like there was a group of people in the room with me, and they were having a conversation or a quiet get-together. I don't know why, but to this day, whenever I think about it, I picture them in 1930s style. But I have nothing to base this on. It would be a couple of words, a snatch of conversation, usually male but not always, and background noise like glasses clinking, or a recorded player of something similar, party noise style, and laughter. I would often just hear good-natured laughter with the men's voices. I talked to my dad about this because it was becoming a weekly thing, and honestly, I began to wonder if I was going a bit mad. He told me he hadn't heard voices, but did admit that he had other things happen to him that didn't happen to me. It was only when I moved out and into my new place that I realized after a few weeks I hadn't heard any of the voices, and the realization made me laugh with joy. I wasn't losing my marbles after all. I stayed again at the house in 2002 after my dad died to help my mum. The first night there, I heard the voices again. It startled me, but they were old friends, and I knew by then that I was mentally okay. I'm convinced the house I grew up in was haunted. Not a fun, ghost hunting TV show way, more like a creeping dread that settled into your bones and never quite left. At the time, I didn't have a word for it, but now looking back, it was like living with something that was always out of sight, always watching. One summer morning when I was around 13, I stayed home while the rest of my family went out to the shops. It was 10 a.m., bright outside. And I was in the bathroom upstairs when I heard the sound of boots on the stairs. Heavy ones, like a man, big steps, slow, deliberately climbing upwards. Step by step, they reached the landing and paused, then started towards the bathroom door. I froze. I was completely alone, but the steps were so loud and so real, I instinctively shouted out, "Hello?" The footsteps didn't hesitate. They just turned around, same heavy pace like nothing was wrong. They headed back down the hallway and into my parents' bedroom. That was worse than if they'd stopped. The calm, deliberate way they moved felt wrong, like whoever it was didn't care that I knew they were there. I didn't even flush. I jumped off the toilet and bolted downstairs, heart pounding. From the living room below, I could still hear the footsteps creaking above me. Pacing slowly around, it sounded like someone was fiddling with the plugs in the bedroom, like little mechanical clicks and scraping sounds. I don't remember how long it lasted, but eventually it stopped. I didn't go back upstairs until my family came home. That wasn't the only time something happened. One afternoon I was alone again, sitting in my room, when suddenly every kitchen cupboard downstairs slammed open and shut. All of them. Over and over, loud and violent, like someone was down there tearing the place apart. I thought my parents had just come back and they were making noise for some reason, but when I peeked out the window, the driveway was empty and their car wasn't there. My dog, who normally followed me everywhere, refused to go downstairs. She just stood at the top step, staring down, ears back. I didn't go down either. I shut my bedroom door, sat on the floor with my back to it and waited. It wasn't just specific events that made the house feel off, it was the stairs. Every time I went down them, I had this overwhelming sense that something was right behind me, like a huge man, tall, broad-shouldered, looming just over me, hands outstretched, was about to shove me. I told myself I was just scared of falling, that it was all in my head. But when we moved years later, that feeling disappeared completely. I never felt it again, not once. I mentioned it casually to my sister and dad, and both of them admitted without hesitation that they'd felt it too. There was one night I'll never forget. I was lying in bed when the whole thing started shaking, not just creaking, violently moving, like someone was ramming it from below. It was a bunk bed with a desk underneath and I was on top. The shaking was so strong I thought the whole frame might collapse. I screamed for my mum. She came rushing in, tried to soothe me, said it was just the pipes under the floor. I could tell even then that she didn't believe it herself. She told me years later she just made it up on the spot to calm me down. As soon as she left the room, it started again, harder this time, like someone was hitting the bed leg near my head with a hammer. Bang, bang, bang. I pulled the covers over my face and waited for it to stop. It did eventually, but I didn't sleep that night. My sister and my mum had their own stories about that house. Strange whispers, cold spots, things that moved or were missing. Even my dad, who always brushed off anything paranormal, admitted once that he hated the stairs too. But when I asked about if anything had ever happened to him, he just looked at me and said, "I don't want to talk about it." And that somehow scared me more than anything else. After my mother passed away, I went to live with my friend and his mum for a while. I didn't want to stay at my friend's house initially, but they didn't want me to be alone during that time. Staying at anyone's house always made me feel uneasy for some reason. On my first night there, early in the morning, I woke up to the sound of my bedroom door opening, and a man wearing a white button-up shirt with rolled-up sleeves and dark brown suspenders walked into my room, holding a bag of tools. He turned the light on, looked at me, and then walked through another doorway into the utility room. I was too groggy to react, and soon after I fell asleep again. When I woke up later, the room was dark, exactly as it had been when I went to bed the night before. Confused, I figured I must have imagined the whole thing. I went upstairs for a coffee and casually asked my friend's mum if the man in the suspenders was still around. She gave me a strange look before telling me that it had just been the two of us in the house all night. At that point, I was very confused. I explained in detail what the man looked like, his height, weight, clothes, and facial hair, everything. Her face went pale. Without saying a word, she rushed into the room and came back holding a photo. When she showed it to me, my heart nearly stopped. It was the man I had seen in the basement that morning. He was even wearing the same clothes. She told me that he had passed away 30 years ago. It was her grandfather, the previous owner of this property. He had taken his own life to save the farm. After investing all of his money into the horses instead of modern machinery, his investment flopped, leaving the farm on the brink of foreclosure. Desperate, he devised a tragic plan. On a stormy night, he carried a lightning rod into the middle of a pond where nature took its course. The lightning struck the rod, ending his life instantly. But because of this, his life insurance paid out, saving the family dairy farm and preventing the bank from taking their home. I had spent the night at my cousin's house. I was around 7 years old. In the early 2000s as a kid, it was all about PS2 and DVDs. Phones were not like today. It was around 1 a.m., and I'm upstairs chilling and sleeping in my cousin's room. The movie Dumb and Dumber was playing as we put it to play to fall asleep to. I remember getting up, and at one point to go use the restroom, which was across the hall. I walked out, and of course there's no one awake. Lights are off, and everyone is asleep in their rooms. I try to be quiet as I don't want anyone to wake up. The last thing I wanted to do was wake up my uncle and get a scolding for being loud. I get to the bathroom as per usual, do my business, and once I'm washing up, I kind of hear this movement outside the door, as if someone were walking by. I turn off the lights and open the door, turn to my left, and directly at the other end of the hall I see a woman in white clothes, full of blood, running down her mouth and face, staring at me. It was late at night. I didn't understand what I was seeing. I remember being stood there dumbfounded for a few moments. She was wearing all white, and some parts looked dark, almost like a Victorian dress. Her hands looked white, no skin color whatsoever. Her face was pure white like paper, but I could still see her eyes and face, almost like how the women had their faces full of white powder back in the day, and the blood was literally running down her face, as if she'd just eaten something full of blood. All I remember is hurrying to get to my cousin's room and shut the door. I wake up my cousin, slapping him, trying to get him awake to tell him. He didn't believe me and went back to bed. I didn't scream. I just remember being so scared. It was almost like being in shock. You can't cry or anything. I sort of froze up and had this constant thought in my head that the monster was still out in the hall. Hours go by and it's morning time. I walk out and there's nothing. No blood, no trail, no white clothes, no anything. Ever since then, I've always called her the Lady in White. I'm in my 20s now and still have no clue what that might have been. I did hear stories of my cousin's family seeing things in that house. One of my other cousins apparently messed around with a Ouija board at the time, and I hear it had a lot to do with bad energy in the house. But I guess I'll never know for sure. I grew up hearing stories. Everyone in our town knew about her, the girl who ran away in the 70s and never came back. She was just 16, barely old enough to be on her own when she took off on her bike one summer night, wearing her favorite red windbreaker. No one knows exactly what happened, only that she never made it out of town. They found her body near the old intersection by the railroad tracks, the victim of some freak accident. For years, people claimed they'd seen her. A quick glimpse of a girl on a bike, the hood of her red windbreaker pulled up, her face hidden in the shadows. She'd appear near that same intersection and always at night, always watching. Some said she was looking for a way home. Others believed she didn't even know she had passed away. I never paid the stories much attention, until the night I saw her for myself. It was late, past midnight, and I was on my way home. The streets were empty, and the town was silent. I pulled up to a red light at the same intersection. Then I saw it. Movement just out the corner of my eye. I turned my head and she was there, perched on her old bike, her red windbreaker zipped up tight, the hood covering most of her hair. She was looking right at me. For a second, it didn't even register. My mind fumbled for an explanation. Some night biker, a trick of the light, anything, but deep down I already knew. I whipped my head back around, heart hammering, staring straight ahead. No way. I forced myself to look again, but she was gone. I sat there until the light turned green, gripping the wheel like I might fall through it. I never told anyone. Not really. Because deep down I knew, whether it was a ghost, a memory, or something else entirely, I had seen her. And I think she saw me too. My son was born with a single heart ventricle and needed 3 open heart surgeries before the age of 5 to survive. After my son's 3rd heart surgery, he developed an extremely rare complication that could only be resolved with a heart transplant. We lived in that hospital for almost 3 months while he was on the transplant list. I can honestly say those were the worst 3 months of my life. Seeing my son suffer and not knowing if he'd be okay. It was absolute torture. During the course of waiting, the complication was unexpectedly resolved, and he no longer needed the heart transplant. Believe me when I say it was nothing short of a miracle. No one could have predicted that he wouldn't need it. Fast forward a couple of months after we finally came home. I was going through some boxes that had my husband's old family pictures in it, including some pictures of my son's grandfather, my father-in-law. My father-in-law died 16 years before my son was born, so my son never met him. We didn't have any pictures of him in our house at the time either. At some point, my son sat next to me at the kitchen table to see what I was doing. We came across a picture of my father-in-law and my son said, "Oh, hey, I know that guy." I said, "Oh, you don't know him, buddy. You've never met him. He died long before you were born." My son had a very serious expression on his face and said, "Yes, I did, Mummy. I know him. That's Bill. He used to sit next to me every night at the hospital and watch me. I think he was a doctor or something." My father-in-law's name was Bill. My son didn't know that. I didn't know what to make of this, but I liked the idea of my son's grandfather watching over him during the scariest time of our lives, which was resolved through a legit miracle. My son's 13 now, and I'd like to think that his grandfather is his guardian angel, watching over him. I live in the Caribbean, and the house I live in has a forest to the back of it. And for the longest time, me and my family didn't give it much attention. So everything related to hearing sounds in the night, etc., could be chalked up to animals just roaming around. All this took a turn until one day, playing in the backyard, I saw what looked like the end of a grey cape or robe passing by a wall. While waiting for it to come to the other side to see what it was, I became impatient and went to see what it could be. After all, winds knocking down bags or clothes was fairly common. And after looking behind the wall, there was nothing. Thinking it might be just a rogue bag in the wind comforted me for the fact of nothing being there after it clearly looked like a piece of heavy cloth just dragging on the floor. After that, it started happening more often around the house, but never on the second floor, only on the backyard or the garage. All these items were the same. Just a tale of clothes until one day my dad left a 7-foot ladder next to the wall that separated the forest from the house. And there I saw it again, only this time in full form. It resembled a man wearing a robe with a hood and a long cape. It took silent steps on the dry leaves, and it didn't acknowledge my presence. It just kept walking until it crossed a thin tree, and it passed, or more like entered it. The figure kept going, but nothing crossed the other side of this glorified twig, until the last part of its cape disappeared into nothing. Being almost 5 at the time, I jumped from the ladder, ate enough dirt to start a soil business after landing on my face, as my legs gave in from the height and kept running to tell my mum. But after, all she told me was that it was probably my imagination, and I shouldn't be trying to cover for myself and just say I fell, and not make a fantastic story out of it. After that, I never saw it again. But I started to have recurring nightmares about a shack that appeared in the backyard, and when I saw it from the balcony, it started screaming while the door swung open, and I couldn't run or walk, just to be slowly dragged to it until it opened and I woke up in a sweat. And then a few days later, they also stopped. I was wondering if anyone has had any similar encounters. And do you think the nightmares were related to the thing, or just a stupid way of me trying to rationalize the event? I thought the dreams were weird because I had never, up until that point, had that type of nightmare. I couldn't find anything I had watched or read that could seem to influence my subconscious to incite it. This is not the first or last thing I've experienced in the house or area. Neighbors, young and old, have all seemed to agree something is wrong here, but not wrong or foul enough to give it the light of day. I want to share something that has haunted me for almost a year now, that I can't comprehend, which I don't think I ever will. My name is Austin and I'm 17 years old. I've been a fan of NASCAR ever since I was a little boy. I have aspirations too. Maybe one day be a NASCAR driver, but that's a story for another time. My family loves NASCAR. We go to the Daytona 500 every year, and 2024 was no different. It was me, my mum, dad, and older sister. My aunt was supposed to come, but she had to back out at the last second due to a work obligation. She gave the ticket to my sister, who decided to bring her close friend, Catherine, with us. My dad is a huge Kyle Busch fan, so made sure to bring his favorite t-shirt, hat, and whatever ridiculous #1 fan supporter things he could bring to show off. We had a debate about who the winner would be as usual, something we always bicker over even when we watch the races from TV. I am a Christopher Bell all the way, while my sister is a fan of Carl Larson, as well as her friend Catherine. Those two are always saying how amazing and handsome he is, and whatever other nonsense girls like to chatter about. My mum is really into Brad Keselowski, so of course she was cheering for him. I decided to wear my favorite Christopher Bell number 20 shirt. We were staying at a hotel not too far from the racetrack, as we don't live near Daytona, so we went there on a weekend getaway, which ended up being delayed to Monday because of the rain. I had woken up at around 10 a.m. and decided to go hang out by the pool and enjoy the nice weather, as it wasn't cloudy or muggy anymore. When I was sitting by the pool, I noticed a tall man that I had never seen before just wandering around looking at me. He kinda looked out of place. His clothes looked like they were from another century, but I didn't pay much mind to that. What got to me was how long he was just staring at me for. "Can I help you?" I called out to him to see what he wanted, but he didn't respond and just kept staring. I started to feel very uncomfortable and decided to head back to the room until it was time to go to the track. I got up off the chair, and when I looked back over to the man, he was gone, like he'd vanished into thin air. The hell? I thought to myself. I would have heard him walk away, and I only took my eyes off him for a few seconds. But I just thought he headed in the opposite direction, and tried to put it past me. When time came, we headed out to the track, and got amazing seats in the stands. I was sitting next to my sister, who was all dressed up. I'm talking skirt, blouses, the works, everything just to come to this race. Her friend as well, and my mum. My dad was sitting next to me on the right side, and we were debating as usual. It was awesome to see the cars lined up on the pit road, and I could immediately spot my favorite driver, Chris Bell, who I was hoping would win. As the race cars made their way onto the track, I was getting pumped up, but that's when I saw the weird man again. He was standing behind the fence a little after pit road. What am I seeing? I asked myself. I was genuinely getting freaked out. Was the man stalking me? Had he been following me? Or was it just a coincidence that he was out there? I was about to point him out to my dad, but the man just vanished into thin air when I took my eyes off him. What the heck's going on? Why did I keep seeing this mysterious individual who would just vanish after I looked to confront him? I just wanted to put it behind me and enjoy the race, so that's what we did. The race itself was awesome. When the race ended, and Christopher Bell, my favorite, finished third, I wasn't disappointed he didn't win, but it was a good race all the same. Standing in the same spot right when we were getting up to leave was the man. I was seriously getting freaked out, and I tapped my dad's shoulder and pointed the man out. But once again, he was gone. My dad just shrugged it off and we went back to our hotel. I saw that man one last time when we were packing up the car to head back home. He was standing near the entrance to the lobby. I finally told my mum about it, and when I described the man to her, she was shocked. She stated that the man sounded exactly like her grandfather, my great-grandfather, who had passed away years before my sister and I were even born. My mum was a little girl at the time. He was apparently a big fan of anything racing and always went to the Daytona 500. Why was I seeing him now? In all my years of coming, I had never seen him, and all of a sudden I was? Perhaps it was a message. I may never know, but we will be going back to the 2025 Daytona 500, which I'm hoping Christopher Bell will win. But I also hope not to see my grandfather's ghost, as it seriously freaked me out. Hey guys, it's Mort here, and thank you so much for listening. I hope you've enjoyed tonight's selection of stories. If of course you did, you can let me know down below. Don't forget that every weekday this June, we have brand new stories hitting you up nice and fresh. So be sure to tune in every single day, not to miss out on the spooks. That's it from me. Join me tomorrow for some truly terrifying night shift stories. It's gonna be good. I also would like to extend a final and huge thank you to my members and patrons whose names can be seen on screen. They of course get a bunch of cool perks, and if you'd like to cash in on them, check out the links in the description to find out more. But until tomorrow, stay awesome and have a good night.